My daughter called me a liar in front of 200 people. The room went silent. Forks midair, glasses frozen. Robert dropped his drink, and I just stood there, smiling like the woman in pearls wasn't me anymore. She was shaking, clutching the mic, her eyes red. Half grief, half fury. "Everyone thinks she's some saint," she said, voice cracking. "But this woman isn't my mother, and she's not the teacher you all think she is. She's a liar, and I have proof." Her words sliced through the air like glass breaking. The applause that had filled the hall seconds ago turned into whispers. I wanted to stop her, to take that folded paper from her trembling hands, but I couldn't move. My heart knew. She had found something I never meant her to see. That night was supposed to celebrate my 40 years of teaching, my so-called perfect life, a husband, a daughter, a clean legacy. Instead, it became my trial. Elaine Parker, 62, teacher, wife, mother. That's what the banner behind me said. But within 5 minutes, every word of it turned into a lie. The lights were too bright, the crowd too quiet, and my husband, Robert, wouldn't look at me. That's when I realized Grace hadn't just uncovered the truth about herself. She'd uncovered his, too. The cake sat untouched, vanilla and almond, my favorite. And as I stared at it, I thought, how strange. The sweetest things are always served right before life turns bitter. Stay with me till the end, and you'll understand why that night I didn't cry. I planned. Mornings in our house always started the same way. A soft whistle from the kettle, the faint crackle of old jazz on the radio, and Robert humming off key as he buttered his toast. For 38 years, we'd shared that table. 2 mugs, 1 chipped, 1 perfect. Mine was the chipped one, the same mug I'd used since Grace was a baby. It said, "World's Best Mom" in fading blue paint. Grace was the reason I breathed. She came into our lives when I'd nearly given up on motherhood. Robert and I had spent years hoping, trying, praying. Doctors, tests, procedures. None of it worked. But when Grace arrived, I stopped asking how. She was ours. She was perfect. And that was enough for me. I built my life around routine, morning tea, school hallways, the chatter of children and the smell of chalk dust. Every day I reminded my students that kindness was a choice, not a coincidence. I used to tell them, one kind word can rewrite someone's story. I believed that. Maybe too much. Robert worked in finance, or at least that's what he told everyone. He was charming, steady, with that quiet kind of confidence that makes you trust him without question. People loved him. I did too. We were the kind of couple neighbors envied. Sunday picnics, Christmas lights, the annual charity bake sale. Every picture on the wall said happiness. Grace grew up surrounded by that love. She was smart, brighter than I ever was. And she had Robert's eyes, or so I used to think. When she got into college, we cried together in the driveway, holding each other for a long time, the sun setting behind us like the end of a chapter. Even then, there were moments I couldn't explain. Times Robert came home late, his tie loose, the smell of cologne that wasn't his. Times he'd change the subject when money came up, saying, "You worry too much, Elaine. Everything's fine." I wanted to believe him. After all, he was my husband, my partner, my best friend. In our bedroom, I kept a small box of mementos, Grace's hospital bracelet, her first drawing, Robert's old love letters. Sometimes late at night, I'd open it just to remind myself that I hadn't imagined our life, that it was real, that it had meaning. The teachers at school used to say I had a calm soul. I suppose I did, but calm doesn't mean unbroken. It just means you've learned how to hide the cracks. When Grace moved back home after college to help with her father's retirement plans, I was overjoyed. She had grown into a poised, confident woman, independent, thoughtful. She'd come into the kitchen every morning, kiss my cheek and tease, "Mom, you're still running on caffeine and worry." We'd laugh, share breakfast, plan little things like garden sales and church events. Life felt whole again, familiar, simple, like an old melody playing on repeat. Then one afternoon I found Grace sitting on the porch, reading an old family photo album. She looked up and smiled, but there was something different in her eyes. "Mom," she said, "you ever feel like pictures lie?" I laughed it off. "Only when I'm in them," I said. She smiled back, but I noticed her thumb tracing the edges of a photo. Robert holding baby Grace, my hand resting over his. That night I couldn't sleep. The question kept echoing. Pictures lie. It felt like she knew something. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it yet. The next morning, I packed her favorite lunch for work. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, and a note that said, "Proud of you. Always." She hugged me before leaving, her hair brushing my cheek, soft as when she was little. That's the thing about love. It blinds you just enough to make the fall hurt more. Back then, I still believed my life was safe, my marriage strong, and my daughter happy. But I didn't know that peaceful life was about to end. It started with small things. Things only a woman who spent nearly 4 decades sharing the same coffee cup would notice. Robert stopped humming in the mornings. The newspaper stayed folded longer. The kettle boiled twice before anyone poured the water. The air in our house began to change, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, heavy way that makes you feel something's watching from the corners. One evening, I found him in the garage, sitting inside his car with the engine off, just staring ahead. When I asked what he was doing, he blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Just thinking," he said, "about retirement plans." His tone was calm, too calm. He'd started spending more time on his laptop, closing the screen whenever I walked by. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he smiled, but his eyes didn't follow. "Everything's fine, Elaine. You know me. Always 2 steps ahead." I wanted to believe him. After all, that's what trust looks like after 38 years, giving someone the benefit of the doubt even when the pit in your stomach says otherwise. Grace began acting differently, too. She'd get home later from her job at the bank, sometimes quiet, sometimes distracted. When I asked how her day was, she'd give small answers, like someone measuring words carefully. Once I caught her looking at Robert's office door. Her brow furrowed, her hand clutching her phone like it carried a truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. "Grace?" I asked gently. She jumped, then smiled too quickly. "Nothing, Mom. Just tired, long day." She hugged me, but it felt rehearsed. That night, I heard muffled voices from Robert's office, low, tense, unfamiliar. The door was closed and the light leaked under the crack like a secret trying to escape. I stood there for a moment, hand on the doorknob, listening. Then I heard it. Grace's voice trembling. "You can't just hide it forever, Dad." There was a pause. Then Robert's voice, sharp but quiet. "You don't know what you're talking about." The next morning, the air between them was brittle. Grace barely spoke. Robert pretended everything was fine, reading the paper upside down. I poured coffee, pretending not to notice. When Grace left for work, I finally asked him, "What's going on between you two?" He looked up slowly, that same disarming smile painted across his face. "You're imagining things, sweetheart. She's just stressed. You know how young people are." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just seeing ghosts. But the following week, our joint account statement arrived in the mail, and the balance didn't make sense. I frowned, double-checking the numbers. "Robert," I called out, "did you move some funds for the house project?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Yeah, just some reallocation for investments. Don't worry about it." His voice was casual, but his hand shook when he lifted his cup. That night, when I passed his office, the door was half open. He was on the phone, whispering, "It's covered. She'll never find out." I froze in the hallway, pulse racing, trying to piece the words together. She'll never find out. Maybe he wasn't talking about me. Maybe it was something else entirely. That's what denial does. It gives you stories to sleep on when your heart already knows the truth. Later, I found an envelope under a stack of old receipts. It had the bank's logo and Robert's handwriting across it. Private. Inside was a transfer receipt for a large amount of money, dated 2 years ago, signed with my name. But it wasn't my signature. My hands went cold. The penmanship was close, practiced, almost perfect, but not mine. When Robert came home that night, I asked quietly, "Did you forge my name on this?" He froze, then laughed. "Elaine, honestly, you think I'd need to forge your name? It's joint property. I probably just signed for both of us without thinking." I wanted to believe him, so I did, because believing him was easier than admitting that everything I built might be built on lies. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Every rise and fall felt like a stranger's breath. The next morning, Grace didn't join us for breakfast. On the table, she'd left a half-empty coffee cup and a note that simply said, "Don't ask me to pretend anymore." I stood there holding that note, heart pounding, unsure which truth was about to surface first, hers or his. Either way, I could feel it. Something had already broken. Love doesn't end in one night. It fades the way color drains from old photographs, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize the picture isn't the same anymore. After Grace left that note, the house felt colder. The walls that once echoed with her laughter now carried only the sounds of chairs scraping, clocks ticking, and doors closing without words. I kept telling myself it was a phase. Stress, work, exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the silence meant something had shifted. Robert and I stopped having breakfast together. He'd leave earlier, say he had errands, meetings, investment consultations. I'd find half-empty coffee cups in the sink and bank letters he never mentioned. I didn't ask anymore. I just folded the envelopes, placed them neatly in a drawer, and pretended not to see the warning signs. At school, I still smiled. I still read stories to children, tied shoelaces, comforted nervous parents. But inside, I was somewhere else, watching my life from a distance. The woman who laughed in the teacher's lounge wasn't me. She was an echo, surviving on habit. One evening, I came home early. Grace was in the kitchen, her phone on the counter, face pale as she read something on the screen. When she noticed me, she quickly locked it and said, "Just work emails." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, I heard her crying in her room. I stood outside the door, listening, torn between knocking and staying silent. I chose silence. It felt safer. A few days later, Robert and I went to dinner with old friends. He played his part perfectly. Charming, witty, generous. The kind of man who made waiters laugh and women blush. But as he reached for his wallet to pay, I noticed something small yet sharp. The tremor in his hand, the hesitation when he signed the check. His confidence had cracks. When we got home, I asked, "Are you all right?" He smiled that practiced smile. "I'm fine, Elaine. Just tired." But he wasn't fine. None of us were. That night, I found him sitting in his office again, staring at an old photograph. The three of us in front of Grace's college dorm, all smiles and sunlight. He didn't notice me standing there. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "If only she hadn't found out." My breath caught. "Found out what?" I asked quietly. He turned sharply, startled. "Elaine, you scared me." He laughed nervously, shaking his head. "You're imagining things again." That phrase, "you're imagining things," became his favorite defense. It was how he built walls. And for years, I helped him build them by choosing not to climb over. The next morning, I tried to talk to Grace before she left for work. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "is something wrong between you and your father?" She looked at me with eyes full of conflict. "Mom, do you ever wish people told you the truth sooner?" The question sliced through me. "Why?" I whispered. She shook her head, tears welling up, because sometimes pretending hurts more than the lie ever could. Then she left, car door slamming, engine fading. And I stood there, clutching the back of a chair just to stay upright. That evening, Robert didn't come home. I waited. Dinner went cold. The candles burned low. At midnight, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at the reflection of the empty chair across from me. He came in around 2, smelling faintly of expensive whiskey and a scent that wasn't mine. I didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't offer to tell me. When he crawled into bed, I turned away. I used to reach for him in my sleep. That night, I pulled the blanket tighter around me, pretending not to feel the distance growing inch by inch between our bodies. Days turned into weeks, and our house, once full of light and chatter, became a museum of ghosts. We spoke only when necessary. Grace stopped coming home for dinners. Even the family dog stopped sleeping in our room. I started keeping a journal again, just short notes, the kind I used to write when I was younger, full of questions I didn't have the courage to say aloud. One night, I wrote, "There's a truth sitting in this house, waiting for someone to open the door. I can feel it breathing with us." The next morning, I found the page torn out. Robert was sipping his coffee, eyes fixed on me. "You shouldn't keep secrets, Elaine," he said softly, almost smiling. That was the moment I realized. He wasn't warning me. He was confessing in disguise. And that was the last time I ever believed silence meant safety. It was a Thursday morning, bright, clean, ordinary. The kind of morning that tricks you into thinking bad things only happen to other people. Robert had already left when I came downstairs. His coffee cup still sat on the counter, half full, lipstick stain on the rim, except I wasn't wearing lipstick. Grace hadn't come home the night before. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At first I told myself she'd stayed with a friend, maybe working late. But when noon came and she still hadn't called, the air inside the house turned heavy. Something was wrong. I checked her room. The bed was unmade, her laptop gone. But her purse, the one she never left without, was sitting on the dresser. I picked it up and froze. Inside was a folded piece of paper, torn from my old journal, the same page that had gone missing days earlier. In my handwriting, the line read, "There's a truth sitting in this house, waiting for someone to open the door." Under it, in Grace's pen, a new line was added. "I found the door, Mom. It's him." My knees went weak. I called Robert immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. The sound of his recorded voice. "Leave a message after the tone," felt like mockery. By evening, the sky had turned that strange violet shade that comes before a storm. The wind rattled the porch swing. I sat by the window, clutching the phone, waiting for headlights that never came. At 9:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Breath shallow. "Mrs. Parker?" A man's voice, calm, official. "This is Detective Hall from the precinct. We've recovered your daughter's car." My throat tightened. Recovered? It was found near the old marina, engine running. No sign of your daughter. I dropped the phone. The world tilted. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. By the time I reached the station, Robert was already there, sitting in the waiting area, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. "What happened?" I demanded. "What did you do?" He looked up slowly. "Elaine, please, calm down. She probably just needed space." "Space?" I hissed. "Her car was found abandoned." He exhaled, stood, and placed his hands on my shoulders. "You're overreacting." The same word he'd used every time he lied. Detective Hall returned moments later. "Mrs. Parker." "Do you recognize this?" He placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside it, a folded envelope with my name written across the front. The handwriting was Grace's. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a printed bank statement, one of Robert's private accounts. The balance was nearly empty, multiple transfers labeled Foundation Fund and Education Support. But at the bottom, a single line stood out. Recipient, R. Parker. Signature, E. Parker. My name again. Forged again. I stared at him. "You stole from me." He laughed under his breath, low and bitter. "It was for us, Elaine. You wouldn't understand the details. For us? I snapped. You drained everything I worked for, my retirement, our savings, all gone. The detective's eyes darted between us. Sir, I'll need you to stay for a few questions. Robert's jaw clenched. You think I'd hurt my own family? I turned to him, my voice trembling but sharp. You already did. The storm outside broke then. Thunder cracking over the building, rain slamming against the glass like the sky itself had finally lost its patience. Hours later, I sat alone in my car outside the station. The envelope lay on the passenger seat, rain drumming against the windshield. I kept reading the statement over and over, hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves, that the nightmare would undo itself somehow. Then my phone buzzed again. One message. No sender, just a video attachment. I pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from inside a car. Grace's voice, scared, shaking. Dad, you can't fix this with money. You can't lie your way out this time. Robert's voice followed, low and angry. You don't understand, Grace. I did what I had to do. For her. For us. The video ended there, so abrupt, mid-sentence. I sat in silence, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. My husband had lied, my daughter had disappeared, and the only proof I had was a forged signature and a voice in the dark. I drove home that night through sheets of rain, headlights smearing against the glass. The house looked different when I arrived, colder, foreign, like it belonged to someone else. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell, not of roses or candles, but of burning paper. Robert was standing by the fireplace, feeding documents into the flames. "What are you doing?" I shouted. He turned, startled, holding one last sheet, Grace's photo from her college graduation. The firelight flickered across his face, his shadow stretching like a monster on the wall. "Elaine," he said quietly, "some truths should never see daylight." That's when I realized he wasn't destroying evidence. He was erasing her. I lunged forward, grabbing the photo from his hand before it hit the fire. My fingers burned against the heat, but I didn't care. He tried to stop me, but I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're not burying her like you buried the truth." And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in Robert's eyes, the kind that only appears when a man realizes the woman he controlled for 40 years has finally stopped being afraid. That night, I promised myself I'd find Grace and I'd burn his lies in daylight, but I still didn't know why he did it. Not yet. Sleep became a stranger after that night. I sat by the window until dawn, watching rainwater crawl down the glass while the ashes in the fireplace turned white. Robert slept upstairs as if nothing had happened, but the sound of his footsteps above me felt like thunder inside my skull. At sunrise, I started searching. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Proof, maybe, or forgiveness. But I knew the truth was hiding somewhere inside the life I thought I understood. Grace's room smelled faintly of her shampoo and paper. She'd always kept journals, scattered between novels and old photos. I opened her desk drawer and found a small notebook with a cracked spine. Inside were dates, bank names, and notes scribbled in shorthand. One line was underlined twice. Dad's transfer not from Foundation, from Mom's account. My stomach tightened. She'd known for months. Halfway through the pages, a folded receipt fell out. Withdrawal slip dated 2 years ago, signed again with my forged signature. But this one had something different scribbled on the back. A number, 4956 Lawson. I didn't recognize it, but my instincts told me it wasn't random. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. The clerk looked nervous when I asked about the transaction. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, that file was flagged. I can't access it without authorization." "Flagged by whom?" I asked. He hesitated. "By Mr. Parker." I smiled tightly, nodding like a woman who hadn't just confirmed her husband was laundering her future. When I got back home, Robert was already there, sitting on the couch with a drink in his hand. "You've been busy," he said without looking up. I went to the bank, I replied. He froze, glass halfway to his lips. You shouldn't have done that. Why? Because I might find the truth? He stood, walking slowly toward me. Because you won't like what you find. His tone wasn't angry, it was pitying, and that terrified me more than shouting ever could. That night, I heard my phone buzz at 2:14 a.m. One new message, no name, no number, just 4 words. Check his old briefcase. My hands shook as I crept into his office, every shadow stretching like an accusation. The briefcase sat under the desk, leather, worn, familiar. I flipped the latches open and froze. Inside were documents, old contracts, photocopies, a small velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope labeled Paternity Confidential. My heart stopped. I tore it open. Inside were 2 test reports, dates from 30 years ago, both bearing Robert's name. The first showed infertility. The second, dated a year later, had a single word stamped in red, non-paternal. My breath caught. I stumbled back, gripping the desk for balance. 30 years ago, the year Grace was born, a sound behind me, floorboard creaking. I turned. Robert stood at the doorway, half lit by the hallway lamp, face unreadable. Couldn't sleep? He asked quietly. I hid the papers behind me. What is this? Things you weren't supposed to see. You lied to me. You lied to her. He walked closer, slow and deliberate. I protected you. Protected me? I spat. By building our family on a lie? His eyes darkened. You were desperate for a child, Elaine. You wanted to be a mother more than anything. So I gave you that. I made it happen. I stared at him, horror spreading through my chest. You arranged it? He didn't answer. I took a step forward. Who was it? Robert. Who's her father? He smiled then. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You really don't want to know. That was when I knew he wasn't just guilty. He was proud of what he'd done. He reached for the envelope, but I pulled back. Don't, I warned. Elaine, he said softly, you're not thinking straight. Put it down. I looked him dead in the eyes and whispered, for the first time in my life, I am. I left the house before dawn, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline. Outside, the world was still dark, but for the first time, I felt awake. I didn't know where Grace was. I didn't know who to trust, but I knew one thing for certain. Robert's secret wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about blood, and I was done pretending not to bleed. The name Lawson haunted me. It was scribbled in Grace's notes, tied to the money trail, and whispered like a ghost inside Robert's briefcase. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside the house, headlights off, the briefcase open beside me, reading every page again and again. One document mentioned Lawson Fertility Center, case number 4956. The date matched the year before Grace was born. My breath hitched. By morning, I was driving across town, heart pounding, rain misting the windshield. The clinic still existed, tucked behind a dull strip mall, faded sign hanging crooked, Lawson and Reeves Reproductive Health. Inside, the receptionist smiled the way people do when they've practiced for years. How can I help you? I'm looking for records, I said. From the late 90s. Patient name, Robert Parker. She typed for a moment, then frowned. I'm sorry. Those files are sealed. Sealed by who? She hesitated. By court order, requested personally by Mr. Parker. The air seemed to leave my lungs. I leaned closer. Listen to me. My daughter's missing. If you know something, anything. Her expression softened. She glanced around, then whispered, Come back after 5. The manager's gone by then. I nodded, whispering a thank you that barely made it out of my throat. At 5 sharp, I was back. The woman slipped me a single folder wrapped in a manila cover. This never happened, she said. In my car, I opened it with trembling hands. The first page listed Robert's infertility diagnosis. The second page, a donor agreement, anonymous, male, age 29. No name, just an ID code. But the next page had something that stopped my heart cold. A signed consent form, not from Robert, but from me. My forged signature again, and below it another line added later in faint pencil. Payment received by donor, $25,000, check cleared to account, D. Lawson. The name hit me like a blow. Lawson. He wasn't just the doctor, he was the donor. I could barely breathe. The rain outside turned harder, pounding the roof like drums. I stared at the paper, the letters blurring. Robert had paid the doctor to father our child. He had built our family on deceit, bought biology like merchandise, and made me live a lie for 30 years. I wanted to scream. Instead, I started the car and drove straight to the only place that made sense, Grace's bank. She'd worked there since college, had friends, co-workers who adored her. One of them, a young teller named Mia, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Parker, oh my God, we've been so worried. Grace hasn't been in for days." "She left something behind," I said quickly. "An account? Maybe under her name, maybe mine. Please, I just need to know." Mia hesitated, then leaned forward. "There's one file she locked right before she disappeared. Internal access only. It's labeled Trust Account, Lawson Estate." The room spun. Lawson Estate. That meant it wasn't just the clinic. There was an entire foundation behind it. Mia bit her lip. I probably shouldn't say this, but she told me she found out who her biological father was. She said she was going to confront him. I gripped the counter. When? The day before she disappeared. I left the bank shaking. Pieces of the puzzle were colliding too fast to process. The forged papers, the fake signatures, the payments, the secrecy. That evening, an email arrived from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You deserve the truth." Attached was a single photo. It was old, slightly grainy. Robert shaking hands with a man outside a building labeled Lawson Foundation 1997. Behind them, a young nurse holding a clipboard, and in the corner, a faint reflection in a window that looked like me. My phone buzzed again. A second message. "He lied to you both." My pulse thundered. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came seconds later. "Someone who's tired of his lies. Meet me at St. Andrew's Park tomorrow, 6 p.m. Bring the folder." I didn't know if it was a trap, but fear had stopped controlling me the moment Robert tried to burn Grace's photo. The next evening, the park was nearly empty, the air heavy with the smell of wet grass. A man stood by the benches, mid-50s. Coat collar turned up. He looked nervous. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked. "Yes, who are you?" "My name's Daniel Reeves," he said quietly. "I used to work with Dr. Lawson. He died 2 years ago. Before he passed, he left me something. Said I'd know when to deliver it." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter, written in shaky handwriting, to Elaine Parker. "You don't know me, but you deserve the truth. Your husband knew from the beginning that I was the donor. He asked for it, paid for it, and when your daughter began searching, he came back, threatened me to keep silent. She visited me last week. She knows everything. She left before I could protect her. If anything happens, tell the police to look at Robert Parker's accounts. He used them to move money offshore through my name." Signed, Dr. Daniel Lawson. I lowered the paper slowly, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. "Why are you helping me now?" I asked. Daniel looked away. "Because I should have stopped him 30 years ago. I thought I was helping a couple desperate for a child. I didn't realize I was selling a secret." The wind carried our silence for a moment. Then I said, "Grace, is she alive?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but if she's smart, she's hiding. He's desperate. He can't let this get out. Not after everything he's built." I nodded, clutching the letter like it was oxygen. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where our family once shared birthdays and laughter. I spread the documents, photos, and letters across it like battle plans. Grace wasn't missing by accident. Robert had been cleaning up loose ends, and I had just become one of them. But I wasn't running anymore. I was done being the quiet wife with polite words and blind faith. This time, I'd make sure his empire of lies fell exactly the way it was built, piece by piece, smile by smile, until nothing was left but truth and ash. The next evening, I waited until the house was quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, steady and deliberate, like a countdown. Robert was in his study, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. I stood in the doorway holding the folder from Dr. Lawson's clinic. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Always for you." I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and laid the folder on his desk. "Then tell me the truth." His smile faltered. "Elaine, we've been over this." "No," I cut in, my voice sharp. "We've danced around it, buried it, burned it. But we've never said it out loud. You paid a man to father my child." His hand froze mid-air. He blinked slowly, then set the glass down. "I gave us a family." "You gave me a lie," I shot back. "You forged my name. You used my body to cover your shame." His jaw tightened. "You wanted a child more than anything. You begged God for one. I made that happen. I fixed it." I laughed, a sound I barely recognized. "You fixed it? You bought a man's seed like a business transaction and built 30 years of lies on it." He stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. "Don't make this ugly, Elaine." "It already is," I said, stepping closer. "Grace found out. She went to Lawson before she disappeared." For the first time, I saw real panic flicker in his eyes. "She what?" "She met him. He left me a letter. You threatened him." "Didn't you?" He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand how fragile everything is. My career, our reputation, the fund." "The fund?" I snapped. "You mean the money you stole in my name?" He spun around, eyes burning. "I did that for us." "No, Robert," I said quietly, deadly calm now. "You did it for control. You lied to your wife, used your daughter's life, and when the truth came back, you tried to erase it." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You think you're the victim here?" "I know I am," I said, "and so is she." For a moment, silence stretched between us, sharp and dangerous. Then his voice dropped, cold as steel. "Grace isn't your daughter, Elaine. You know that now. So stop pretending she is." That line sliced through me like a blade. My hands shook, but I didn't back down. "She may not be my blood, but she is my child. I raised her, loved her, protected her. From the world and from you." He sneered. "You wouldn't have had her without me." I took a step closer, eyes locked on his. "And you wouldn't have lost her if you'd been a man worth having." For the first time, he looked small, the kind of small that comes when pride collapses. "You don't know what you're doing," he said softly, voice trembling. "Oh, I do," I said. "I'm done protecting your legacy." I opened my bag and placed a flash drive on the desk. "That video Grace recorded? I sent it to the police this morning, along with your forged contracts, your offshore accounts, and Lawson's letter." His face drained of color. "You wouldn't—" "I already did." He took a step forward. "Elaine, think about what this means. We'll lose everything." "You'll lose everything," I corrected. "I already did." The rain outside swelled, thunder rumbling like the sky itself was taking sides. He slumped into the chair, head in his hands. "You've ruined me." I looked at him, this man I'd once called the love of my life, and for the first time I didn't feel fear or hate. I felt pity. "You did that yourself?" I said softly. As I turned to leave, he whispered, "Where will you go?" "Where the truth leads me," I said, "and this time it won't be back here." I paused at the doorway, glanced back once. "Oh, and Robert." He lifted his head slowly. "Grace isn't gone. She's alive. She's the one who sent me the messages. She's safe, far from you." His eyes widened. "You're lying." I smiled faintly. "Funny. That used to be your line." Then I left him there, surrounded by the ashes of everything he'd built. A king without a kingdom, a liar without an audience. Outside, the storm finally broke. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the sound of thunder. I'd already survived a louder kind of storm, the kind that lives in silence and wears a wedding ring. The morning after I left Robert, I drove straight to the police precinct with the flash drive in my hand. The city was still gray from last night's rain, streets shining like mirrors, every reflection reminding me of what I'd survived. Detective Hall looked up from his desk as I entered. "Mrs. Parker," he said, surprised. "You're back." I placed the folder and the flash drive on the table. "I'm not back, Detective. I'm here to finish this." He skimmed through the documents, brows tightening with each page, the bank statements, the forged signatures, the offshore transfers, the fertility papers. When he reached the letter from Dr. Lawson, he exhaled slowly. "This is enough to open a full case. Are you prepared for what comes next?" "I've been preparing for 38 years, I said. He nodded, picked up his phone, and made the call that would unravel everything. Within hours, the story broke. Financial fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and falsified records. The headlines called it the Parker Foundation Scandal. Reporters camped outside the house, microphones and cameras aimed like weapons. The man who'd built a life out of other people's money and other people's silence was finally cornered. Robert was arrested that evening, still in his suit, still pretending to be dignified. I watched from across the street as the officers led him out in handcuffs. The flash of camera lights painted his face white. His eyes searched the crowd until they found mine. I didn't look away. For once, he was the one being examined, and I was the one standing free. Inside the courtroom weeks later, the truth unfolded piece by piece. The prosecution detailed every transfer, every forged document, every lie. Daniel Reeves testified about the fertility cover-up, the payments, the threats. And when they played Grace's recording, her voice trembling but firm, the room went silent. "Dad," she said in the clip, "you can't buy love and you can't hide truth forever." Robert's shoulders slumped as if the words had finally landed after years of echoing. When the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. My voice was steady. I loved that man for most of my life. I believed in him, built a home with him, carried his secrets. But love without truth is a cage, not a marriage. And I'm done living in cages. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge nodded slowly. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Robert closed his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked empty. After the trial, I walked out into the sunlight. No cameras, no noise, just clean air. Daniel was waiting by his car, holding an envelope. "Grace wanted you to have this," he said quietly. Inside was a letter in her handwriting. "Mom, I needed to expose him. I couldn't let his lies define you anymore. I went into hiding until it was safe. Please don't hate me for what I did that night. I didn't destroy your life. I freed it. When you're ready, find me." Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't heavy like before. They were lighter, like rain after drought. Detective Hall approached, hands in his pockets. "He'll serve time, probably the rest of his life. You did the right thing." I nodded. "No, Detective, Grace did." He smiled faintly. "And you survived it." In the weeks that followed, I sold the house. Every room echoed when I packed, every corner holding whispers of the life I once thought was perfect. I donated Robert's suits to charity, burned the old receipts he used to hide from me, and kept only one thing: Grace's childhood photo. One evening, as I sorted the last of the boxes, I got a text from an unknown number. just coordinates and 2 words: come home. I drove 3 hours north, through winding roads and fading light, until I reached a small coastal town. There, by a quiet cafe overlooking the sea, stood Grace. Her hair was longer, her smile softer, but her eyes were mine. We didn't need words. She just opened her arms and I stepped into them. "I thought I lost you," I whispered. "You never did," she said. "I just had to make sure you were finally free." The waves crashed behind us, the sky turning gold. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Real, solid, earned peace. Robert's empire had fallen, his lies exposed, his power gone. But the one thing he couldn't destroy was the bond between the 2 women he underestimated most. That night, as Grace and I watched the sunset from the cafe porch, she turned to me and asked softly, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I smiled faintly. "No, because if pain is the price of truth, I've finally paid in full." She reached for my hand. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "we start over. Honest this time." We sat there in silence as the tide rolled in, washing away the last traces of the storm. 6 months passed before I could walk past a mirror without flinching. For a long time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The soft edges were gone, replaced by sharper lines, clearer eyes. But maybe that's what truth does. It strips you until only the real parts remain. Grace moved in with me for a while. We rented a small apartment near the coast. Nothing fancy, but quiet, full of light, full of breath. She worked remotely, helping the investigation wrap up, while I volunteered at a local community school. Every time I stepped into a classroom and saw little hands raised, eager and innocent, I remembered who I was before the lies: a teacher, a mother, a believer in second chances. The world had found out everything about the Parkers. The news ran the story for weeks. Retired principal exposee's husband's decades of fraud. They called me brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. But inside that exhaustion was something new. Peace with myself. One morning, over coffee, Grace said, "Mom, you know people online are calling you the quiet storm." She laughed. "Guess they're right. You were calm until you weren't." I smiled. I guess that's how storms work. They build in silence, then change everything. The court sent the final notice in early spring. All assets liquidated, debts repaid, Robert serving 35 years. His lawyer called, asking if I wanted to visit. I didn't. There are some goodbyes that don't need words, just distance. Instead, I wrote him a single line in a letter I never sent. "You taught me that love built on control isn't love. It's a leash, and I've learned how to walk without one." Grace found the letter weeks later and smiled. "You should publish that, Mom. It could help people." "Maybe one day," I said. On my 63rd birthday, she surprised me with something small, a silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Truth is freedom." When she clasped it around my wrist, I felt the weight of it. Not heavy, just real. We celebrated quietly, just the 2 of us, watching the sunset over the water. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender, and the waves reflected the colors like melted glass. "I used to think happiness meant everything staying the same," I said. "Now I know it's about surviving change." Grace leaned her head on my shoulder. "You did more than survive. You taught me what strength looks like." I smiled. "You taught me what courage looks like." That night, I dreamed of our old house. The kitchen filled with light, the smell of cake and roses again. But this time, when the lights dimmed and the music faded, no one was left to betray me. Just peace, warm and steady, like forgiveness. In the morning, I stood by the balcony, wind in my hair, the ocean humming below. For years, I'd carried shame like armor. But now, I felt bare, clean, free. The truth had burned everything false away, and what was left was simple. A mother and a daughter, rebuilding from ashes. Robert had his punishment, Grace had her freedom, and I had my life back. Not the same one, not perfect, but mine. That was justice enough. It's been 5 years since that night. The night candles turned to confessions, and a daughter's voice tore open the past I'd buried under good manners and silence. The world has moved on, as it always does. But I still live quietly by the coast. The same sea that once sounded like chaos now feels like a heartbeat. Every morning I walk the shoreline with a thermos of coffee and a notebook tucked under my arm. I still write. Not about pain anymore, but about truth, forgiveness, and the strange freedom that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. Grace lives 2 towns over now. She visits every Sunday with her little boy, my grandson. His name is Daniel. She named him after the man who helped bring our truth to light. When he runs down the beach, laughing, hair wild in the wind, I sometimes see a flicker of the girl she used to be. Brave, stubborn, untamed, and sometimes, when the sun hits just right, I think of Robert. I don't hate him anymore. Hate is heavy. Forgiveness is lighter. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I stopped bleeding for a wound he chose to open. The scandal faded from headlines long ago, but every once in a while I get letters from women, teachers, mothers, wives, saying, "I saw myself in your story." Some ask how I found the courage to stand up after so many years. The truth is, courage didn't arrive all at once. It came in whispers, in the quiet moments when I decided I deserved more than fear. Sometimes I still bake the vanilla cake from my retirement night, but now I serve it to the people I love, not as a disguise for pain, but as proof that sweetness can survive even after betrayal. If you've listened all the way here, thank you. You've walked through my storm with me. And if you've ever felt small, unseen, or betrayed by someone you trusted, know this. Silence protects the wrong person. Speak, even if your voice trembles, because truth has a sound of its own, and once it begins, it never stops echoing. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have forgiven him, exposed him sooner? Let me know in the comments below. I always read them. And if my story touched something in you tonight, don't forget to follow. Because next week, I'll tell you about the woman who fell in love with the man who ruined her daughter's wedding. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop chasing your truth. Did you like my story? Tell me in the comments, and let me know which city you're listening from. I love seeing where my stories travel. If you'd like to support my work, you can send a super thanks. It helps me keep bringing more real stories like this one. There's so much more waiting on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe before you go. With love and respect, I'll see you in the next life story.